The public who are joining us via television and our well-attended audience tonight. I'd like to call the December 17th Planning Commission meeting to order. Development Director Nishimori, would you take our roll call?
I would love to do your roll call tonight. So we have Commissioner Tarnay.
Here.
Commissioner Hall.
Here.
We have Vice Chair Riley.
Here.
And we have a new Planning Commissioner, Daniel Freeman. Are you here?
Here.
Great. This is Tony Commendatory's new appointment. Welcome. And then we also have Commissioner Goth.
Here.
Great.
Right, okay. And at this time, I'd like to invite everyone who is interested in participating in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and at this time, I would like to open the hearing to public comment, but there is nobody in the audience, so we're going to move on from that. I will close public comment, and we will move on to the approval of minutes. These are the minutes from the November 19th regular meeting. Did anyone have any comments? I noticed that I was referred to as, or Jerusha was referred to, well, it was Vice Chair Hall was noted in public comment, and I think the record should be changed to be Vice Chair Riley, just for, clarification. And that was the only thing that caught my eye. Anyone else? Okay, then let's move forward with a roll call for approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the November meeting minutes.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, and we'll take a roll call for approval.
You can all just say aye if you'd like.
We can? Okay, great. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay, and Dan abstains because he was not in attendance. We will move on now to, let's see, we don't have any public hearing minor reviews. We do have a major review, item number 7.1. And it's the Development Code update regarding density bonuses, residential accessory structures, coffee shops, bars, and drinking establishments, and cleanup amendments. And I can't for the life of me understand why there's nobody here. These are really interesting topics. I mean, I think there's a lot that we're going to discuss tonight. And with that, I will pass the mic over to Laura.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. So as Vice Chair Riley noted, we do have a number of current updates before you tonight. Before we get into that, I wanted to give you a quick update on the secondary residential unit changes that recently were adopted by the Council, and then give you a preview at the end of what will be coming before you next. So on December 10th, we took an urgency ordinance to the Council for approval. The state passed some new legislation in October and required us to have the new second unit standards in place by January 1st, which did not allow enough time for us to go through our normal process where we would bring it to you first, you would make a recommendation, it would go through the first and second readings. So based on the town attorney's determination that we needed to have those in place more quickly, we did the urgency ordinance. That included 4 different pieces of legislation, so it was pretty comprehensive. There were quite a few things that were updated. The zoning now includes multifamily for second units, where before it was only single family. You can have a secondary residential unit and a junior accessory dwelling unit, whereas before you could only have one or the other. They made changes to the setbacks, parking, floor area, and occupancy and rental requirements. There's no longer any ability to require an owner to occupy a unit, which was something that some of our HOAs had in their requirements before. And also there's a prohibition now on short-term rentals in second units. So the town attorney did some research to try to figure out if that's retroactive, and based on his interpretation, anything that was built after January 1st, 2017 would be affected by the short-term rental prohibition. Anything before that would not. And in addition to the state mandated changes, the council directed us to make some changes to the language that was in the code at the time about the 3-acre minimum parcel size that environmental health and Lahontan require for ADUs on parcels that are on septic. And that came from a request during public comment to take out the prohibition for ADUs on smaller parcels that have septic systems, because it's not actually a town requirement. And so what we did was modify that language to just defer to the other agencies for their requirements. So there's no action needed from you tonight. Those changes actually went into effect as soon as that urgency ordinance was adopted, so they have been incorporated and are in effect. So our first topic tonight is another state-mandated change to the code. There have been some changes to the density bonus law, one of which is a 100% affordable project, which allows for an 80% density bonus. The mix of affordability can have up to 20% moderate income, so it doesn't have to be all low. There's some other allowances that fall within that. If the project is within half a mile of a major transit stop, then there's actually no limit on density that a jurisdiction can require, and they get 4 concessions that a developer can request. The new changes also include some parking reductions to half a space per bedroom if a project is within that half mile of transit, and the 100% of the units are rental units for low or very low income families, or a housing development is for residents 62 years and older, and they have access to either paratransit or bus service that operates on a certain schedule. And then no minimum parking can be requested by a developer if it's an affordable rental project that is for special needs housing or supportive housing. And I did have a question about that from the staff report. There was a bullet in there that identified that all affordable housing projects could request that, and it's specific to the special needs and supportive housing, not all affordable. They added a couple other sections. One was for student housing and partnered commercial projects, where a developer could work with an affordable housing group to provide the affordable housing. And then there are also a couple of changes that were adopted with the latest housing element, and we wanted to incorporate those into the code. That involved the developer notice requirements and some other parking reductions that the state had previously adopted. Another question that came out of the staff report was about existing language that's in the code that says that the density bonus, cumulative density bonus, can't exceed 35%. So we took a look at that today and are recommending some additional language to clarify that that's except for the other provisions of the chapter, including that 80% density bonus that's allowed for the 100% affordable projects. So if you're in agreement with that, then we would recommend that you adopt those changes with the additional language that we proposed. So we can either go through the rest of the topics and then we can go back and talk about whichever ones you want, or if you want to stop and ask questions, we could do that too.
I don't have a preference. Do you guys have a preference? I guess I might like to, if I were to throw something out, I'd say let's go topic by topic and discuss it, ask questions, consider it, and then move on, unless there's other opinions. You guys?
That sounds good.
Okay. Does that sound good? And was that clear? Yeah. Okay. We'll just go topic by topic.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
So if you have questions,
Well, I have an overall. So I'm confused. I feel like at the beginning, did you say we aren't making a recommendation, or we aren't? These things have been already implemented because of the urgency ordinance, so we're just hearing them, or I'm not totally clear.
only the second unit items. That was already adopted. Everything else is
that's okay.
under your review.
Great. Thank you.
So do you want me to go on and then we'll come back and go topic by topic? We can just run through everything and then come back as needed, if that's your preference.
let's talk about this one.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the beginning, I guess. Okay. Does anyone have any questions regarding the density bonus?
I do.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
Jump in.
my question would be, how is a major transit stop defined for the half-mile limit?
Well, luckily Susie asked this question earlier.
Of course.
And we had the town attorney give us some feedback that his previous interpretation was that the major transit stop definition requires buses that operate every 15 minutes, and our local transit only operates, I think, once an hour. So his determination was that we still, the depot downtown, for example, still wouldn't qualify as a major transit stop.
So nothing in Truckee would qualify as a major transit stop if...
Under the current service that we
Okay.
have, if they were to increase that to every 15 minutes, then yes.
So if somebody wanted to propose a very high density project and try and get this, try and get out of the parking requirements in, say, Brickletown, they wouldn't be able to use this as an exception.
Right, not currently.
Thank you.
And do you have anything else on this?
I don't.
Okay. Susie, it sounded like you had some questions. We can come back.
Many of my questions I did discuss them, but I do feel like it might be good to have them sort of talked about.
You could just you could share the
Yeah.
questions you had, and then the answers you received, I think, would be helpful.
And then it would be on the record. That'd be great.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to jump in with the major transit stop. You end up referring to two different state codes type of thing. A major transit stop also it can be an existing rail transit station, but I think, and Andy, I don't think was 100% sure, but he thinks that our train station doesn't count because it's not rail transit. It is.
Not unless you're going to Chicago.
Right.
I hope
Then-
that changes.
Yeah, and I will say that this could change, especially with the transit center relocation study that's happening. So it could be a huge thing. So I thought it was also huge that there was a bullet point that said 100% affordable housing projects are not subject to any minimum parking requirements, but that is not the case. It is only 100% affordable with supportive and what's the other one? Special needs housing. Because that also would be a huge change. So I did have a question. If we were to have that major transit stop, there was also a concession where you could get up to 3 extra stories, 3 extra. Let me see if I can find it in here. And I had asked, but I don't know if we got any answer. Does the historic district affect that at all, or not at all?
So I believe how it's written is 3 stories or 33 feet of additional height.
Additional, yeah.
And our assumption is that our historic design guidelines wouldn't trump the state law, so that if the developer did qualify for these allowances, then we would not have the ability to say no.
Okay, so if we get a transit stop downtown, we may end up with properties that are 6 stories tall.
I will say in reality, though, the construction of a lot of our existing buildings would limit some of that unless someone wanted to do a really expensive, substantial rehab to those buildings. Because a lot of them are unenforced masonry.
Oh, meaning you couldn't retrofit on top of something, sure.
No.
But if it was a new build,
New build, yeah.
okay. So this again was a question I asked, but I'm still unsure of the answer. The 100% affordable housing projects that are defined that are actually only 80% but termed 100%. There's no differentiation between for sale and for rent in those, or are they all for rent?
So the legislation includes references to rental prices, but it doesn't specifically say it has to be for rent. It's unclear in the legislation, so that might be something that will end up needing to be cleaned up by the state.
Okay, and then our affordable definition is different than this one. Is this going to change our definitions in our code and in our housing plan and stuff?
So how the affordability under that particular bonus section is written is that the 20% can be moderate income, and then the other 80% has to fall within the tax credit allocation committee definition of what's affordable. So I don't imagine that we would necessarily change our affordable housing requirements. They may not be that different from what they would consider very low or low income.
And is that in reference to something that would be considered low or very low?
There's other references in there that talk about lower income, so that's probably the low income category versus very low. But again, it's not very clear in how the state wrote it.
I'm sorry, you said it was probably very low, though.
It could be low or very low. There's other references to lower income. So without reading up on the state, I mean, Danielle might actually know, having worked with them on artist lofts, their financing, they probably have different affordability criteria. She may know off the top of her head.
I don't actually have them off the top of my head, but I do know that the tax credit committee's definitions are more conservative than ours. And if you want the specifics, I can try and find an old staff report.
Sorry, can you repeat that? The tax credit committee's definitions are what?
More conservative in the sense of they're really trying to target and get people in that are at the, extremely low, very low, and low income levels. And so their percentages are lower than ours.
But when they refer to moderate, it's the same moderate that we refer to.
The moderate's the same.
Okay. So okay, so there's a section where it talks about the parking, and it says if the town or an independent consultant has conducted an area-wide or jurisdiction-wide parking study in the last 7 years. So that's what we're currently doing, aren't we?
We are doing a parking study. I'm not sure if what we're doing as part of that would meet the state's criteria, or if it would need to be something more specific to particular development projects. If we are going to require a study, say it's outside the 7 years, or the study that we do is more broad and doesn't meet their criteria, if we require it, then we have to pay for it, is how it's written.
Excellent. Yeah, I did see that the town had to pay for that. In those definitions, there's along with 100% affordable, there's also the moderate income residential project, and that one talks about condominium. Is that the only place? Condominiums are always for sale, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only place that they actually refer to things that are for sale instead of things that are for rent.
Yeah, there's a lot of language in the updates that seemed more geared towards rental projects, but they didn't come right out and say if it had to be or not.
Okay. Can anyone explain to me what a partnered commercial project is? Because I've read that about 7 times and I still don't get it.
Yeah, Yumi actually incorporated that section. That was something that was part of the previous state legislation. So from my understanding, it's when a developer who wants to build a commercial project partners with a developer who wants to do that affordable housing piece. And if they work together, then there's certain concessions that they can qualify for if they meet the criteria under that section.
So it's 2 different developers working together.
Essentially, yeah, it's a partnership.
Okay. Did we talk about, I'm looking in the actual code here, it's 18.212.140, and then section A under the density bonus, it says the amount of density increase shall be 80%. Did we want to change that, or should it be shall be up to 80%?
So most of the language we took was straight out of the state legislation. I can take a quick look and try to find that section and see if that is exactly how it was written.
if someone came in and they didn't want to do the full 80% but wanted to do 60%, they would be allowed though, right?
Let me see if I can clarify that.
Can you explain where that is? I'm trying to find it on the.
Oh, it's page 10 of our staff report. It is
Section A, I think.
Section A, density bonus.
Okay, I see, yeah.
The number 1 right under that.
Thank you.
Um,
Because it can't be up to 80%, because it has to be for lower income households.
your microphone's on even when you're whispering. Do I wait for this or just ask other questions?
You can ask other questions. We
keep
can
going.
multitask.
Yeah. Yeah, keep them coming, or yeah,
So
expeditious.
I'm wondering, and this is kind of a big amorphous question, but because of this major transit stop issue and the concessions that would be made within a half a mile of that, is that going to be a disincentive for us to increase our public transportation? And is there any way to avoid that? Is it going to be a not in my backyard even worse because no one wants a transit center near them? Because then you can have unlimited density and no parking.
Was that a rhetorical question?
That's.
I just, is there,
we could
I mean, you,
throw some thoughts out.
I would
I would
say,
love to hear your
yeah.
guys' thoughts on this as well.
I would say, yeah. I would say yes, that's going to be a disincentive for a transit stop, down the downtown, in the downtown core.
TART is in charge of that. I mean, I guess I don't think, does the public have a lot of input on that process at existing stops?
I think they have some, but
Say. Yeah, I don't know.
public process. But I tend to think that there's only so much developable land in the downtown core, and at this point, our goals and policies are focused on density in the downtown core, and the rail yard is poised to be a fairly dense development, and kind of makes sense being near a transit center. I mean, I'm trying to think about the properties that could be developed in conjunction with a large transit center that was able to have this capacity.
There are still some properties.
Hilltop,
Right.
rail yard.
Well, is Hilltop a half mile?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, a half mile is,
If we had like a radius, you
Right.
could do like
Is it radius or as you
as the
walk
crow
to get there?
flies, or
Yeah.
the-
it would be
that's
most
that's the
likely
thing
radius.
is these policies are made in urban locations that are probably fairly flat and don't have hills and a lack of sidewalks and ways to get from point A to point B. But
And just for some context, because I think it might be helpful, the town's approach to transit is primarily based on funding and then on demand. So although we're part of the TART network and part of, working with Placer County, and there's sort of a regional transit plan that we operate under, and we have a person wholly dedicated to transit, so that's Kelly Beatty. It really is kind of driven by the new projects that come in. So oftentimes the transit stop is decided either as part of that project or once something's been built and is up and running. If we didn't require one as part of that project approval, then we're going in as part of that regional perspective and under that lens to add that afterwards. So I feel like even though the state's kind of saying this is a requirement as far as how Truckee operates, oftentimes you're going to know if a transit stop's being proposed as part of a project because it's based on how many users it's going to generate from that project. A lot of these decisions have already been made with things like the rail yard and Rayleigh's because we're collecting a fee from these projects to support ongoing transit. Once we get the critical mass of people in these areas, then we may go back in and say, okay, now is the time to add an additional transit stop that we didn't anticipate. So I don't think it's quite as critical as it sounds of, oh my gosh, people are going to come in and say, no to having a transit stop next to them, because the reality is it's going to get looked at as part of a project most of the time.
Okay, I don't think we're referring to your general transit stop. We're referring to the hub, wherever that goes downtown, as a major transit stop, because it will be having buses running at a 15-minute headway, which is, from what I've heard, what we're aiming towards to increase ridership. It's not that we have that ridership yet.
We are, and the 15-minute headway would be for all bus stop locations that we have within town. So not just the major hub. And the major hub, like you said, is a point of discussion within the community right now about, do we relocate it from the depot or not? And we don't, I mean, that could end up at the airport. It could, we just don't know. I mean, we've done some analysis, but the community hasn't talked about it. You as decision makers have not talked about it.
Okay, if anyone has any ideas on how to prevent disincentivizing higher rates of transportation, I would love to hear them.
So I did find that section in here, and it does say shall be 80%. So that's what the state mandated.
So does that mean they can't go less than that?
That's how it's written. If someone were to come in and propose this, then we'll have to look at these on a case-by-case basis, since we obviously haven't had to implement any of this yet, and we might need to clarify with the state what their actual intention is.
So there's a part, and I can't find where I've written it down, that talks about the 4 regulatory concessions that would be allowed. I think, can you tell me what type of regulatory concessions would that be?
Are you talking about section C, under concession or incentive?
Possibly, probably.
Okay, so typically I think you are allowed 2 concessions through the existing density bonus law. This new section would allow a developer to get 4 under the criteria that's already in there, plus that additional height if they meet the distance from the transit stop.
Are you wanting to know what those incentives or concessions are? Like specifically examples? Is that your question?
Yeah, what is an incentive or a concession that would fall under this?
Reduced parking is a common one.
Isn't that already taken care of, though?
More so today than it was in our current codes.
So instead of asking for parking and a density increase, they could ask for both of those plus 2 other concessions that are allowed under the language, plus the height increase.
Like a height increase?
Okay, that's 3 examples. What's the 4th?
Or
Could it be a setback variance?
We'll have to pull up our existing code.
There is a reference to development standard reductions, so that could be setbacks and site coverage.
floor area ratio or things?
But doesn't it say that you don't get... So... Doesn't it say that you don't get, what was it, design standards concessions or something?
I'm pulling it up.
One of the sections has that specific language that if you get, I think maybe it's the unlimited density, that if you get that, then you don't also get the development standard modifications.
Okay, so that's the difference. If you're just doing the density to the 80%, you would still get your concessions. If you're going above that 80%, if you're near the major transit, then you don't get anything else.
Yeah, from what I recall from reading the legislation.
So our current concessions include things like reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design requirements. It exceeds the minimum building standards approved by the California Building Standards Commission. There are things that you can request like vehicular parking spaces. I'm not reading everything. Approval of mixed-use zoning in conjunction with the housing project if commercial, office, industrial, or land uses will reduce the cost of the housing development. other regulatory incentives or concessions proposed by the developer or the town that result in identifiable, financially sufficient, and actual cost reductions. So it's pretty wide open.
Okay, I think that has actually answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Jerusha, do you have
Good
any?
for now.
Yeah. Dan, did you have any questions?
I had a question on the parking reduction. If there's an existing project, say a multifamily project, and a developer wants to add an ADU or multiple ADUs, and the project was approved under an old parking standard, do they need to just accommodate the new one off-street parking space for like a studio or one bedroom, or does the entire project have to now comply with the new parking standard?
Are you talking about under the second unit changes that were made?
Yes.
So there's a lot of exemptions from requiring any parking. If you're within half a mile of transit, a transit stop, not a major transit hub, you're exempt. If you're in the historic district, you're exempt. So most of Truckee actually we wouldn't be able to require parking anyway, including all of downtown.
But I think you're asking if a project doesn't currently comply with our today standard.
Exactly. It's existing.
So it's legal non-conforming. That's a great question. Our codes currently say that the project would need to be brought up into conformance in order to approve subsequent development.
So I suppose they'd have to provide parking for the single-family residence if they don't currently, but not for the ADU. If
But
it's
this
exempt.
doesn't change that.
I don't believe so.
Anything else? I actually realized I had a couple questions about the ADUs, and I know it's retroactive, but I did want to get clarification before we move on.
Can I tag onto his parking one real quick beforehand?
Yes.
Okay, so for the parking space reductions, it was reduced to 0.5 spaces per bedroom for projects within a half a mile of a major transit. Does that mean that a studio doesn't require any, as it doesn't have a bedroom?
We've run up against that with the legislation language for second units too. It is a little confusing. I'm not sure how that would actually be applied.
All right, thank you.
And the whole notion of the major transit stop, and the major transit stop means it comes every 15 minutes. So I guess I'm not clear. This is the density bonus is different than the ADU requirements in terms of parking.
Right.
And so like what you were saying with regards to downtown, just being within a half mile, regardless of the number of times the bus stops, just being in proximity of a stop allows you to be exempt from parking. Is that
Right.
Okay. I have these two questions, points of clarification on the ADUs. There was a statement about with a new ADU, you can encroach in 4 feet into the side and rear setbacks.
So the most setback we can require is 4 feet.
Okay, and so right now, I think is it 10 feet typical?
That's the standard setback in most
so,
residential.
So if you were to propose an ADU, you could go up to 4 feet from the property line? Is
Right.
that, and that's side and rear?
Correct.
Okay. And then I had a conversation with Jennifer Merchant at the county some time ago. She mentioned that the state was saying that there was a fee waiver for ADUs, so like the town of Truckee, Placer County cannot require development fees for an ADU. Is that correct?
That's about related to impact fees, and they included in this latest legislation an exemption for any ADU up to 750
Yeah,
square feet.
that's what she said.
And when we did our recent adoption of our new impact fees, we included that as an exemption in our schedule. So that's in there now. And then anything above 750 has to be proportionate, and ours is based on square footage. So our interpretation of that was that we would be charging proportionate anyway, so we didn't need to make any changes to that.
So does that mean, and when you say impact fees, what does that encompass in the scope of development fees?
I believe it was only related to the town's fees, so traffic impact fees, facilities.
And traffic impact fees.
And it doesn't include special district fees? Are they exempt from the ADU this fee requirement or
I
waiver?
don't believe so.
I don't think so. It's just that because we don't collect all of their fees, then someone proposing a unit has to go to those individual agencies, and that includes the sewer hookup fee, which is typically the most expensive out of all the fees. So they, in some ways, have to be educated enough to know to ask the right questions because we haven't had an opportunity to coordinate with the other agencies.
So is that something we would probably want to work on
So
to
it's-
incentivize the ADU? I know, like, if I was interested in building an ADU and I was aware that I had these fee waivers and allowances and it was really attractive.
So as part of the ADU program that the council is supportive of, we're going to take about $500,000 out of the general fund housing set aside money, which was $2 million,
yeah.
to dedicate towards the ADU program. And that's part of it, is coming up with a very simple process for people so that it's not intimidating, and then packages everything so that hopefully we can be more of a one-stop shop to encourage people to build ADUs.
Great.
But ultimately, those are fees that are being imposed by governments that are not under control of the town. So it would be a board decision on behalf of the TSD, TTSA, PUD to waive those fees in accordance with what we're doing with our traffic and facilities fees.
But so they're not bound by state law. Is that what you're saying?
They are, and I know that TSD and TTSA looked at the previous legislation, said that they could only charge a proportionate fee. So they already looked at updating all of their fees for ADUs to be in compliance with that. I'm not sure if they've had a chance to digest the latest rules.
Because technically this takes effect the new year. Is it January 1st?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's in effect, and we had to have our ordinance updated, otherwise our ordinance would have been invalid.
Okay. Did anyone have any questions or follow-up on that? I realize I kind of opened a new topic, but these were questions I had wanted to clarify.
I have one more question about the density stuff, but I can come back later.
I just want to make a comment on
Yeah.
TSA and TSD have a flat rate fee, whereas all the other agencies is a per square foot fee. So I don't know how they're going to make a proportionate adjustment.
So what
to
they
that
looked
fee.
at what they looked at doing was a 50% fee for an ADU. And I don't know if there's any difference based on size or if this new requirement would change that, but I know that's what they were looking at.
Well, that's a positive, working in that direction. Anything else on this before we go back, forward? No? Okay. Susie?
Thank you. Sorry. So I did actually have a member of the public contact me today and ask about CEQA studies in relation to a 80% increase in density. And would that trigger more environmental studies to be done, or what would happen?
So I think our assumption is if the underlying project is subject to CEQA, then that would be something we would already be looking at. I'm not sure that a density bonus would on its own trigger that. It didn't seem that that was Andy's interpretation, that that would trigger additional CEQA in itself if the underlying project didn't already require it. But that's something we'll have to look at as these projects start to come in.
So if it's a by right project already, and then they go for an 80% increase in density, that would not require more CEQA studies.
I'm not sure we know yet because we haven't actually seen a project come in that we would, when we do our CEQA analysis, we do the initial study checklist. We look to see what the impacts are and whether environmental review is needed or whether we can do an exemption. So we would still be doing that full review of a new project as it comes in.
I would suspect that we'll see CEQA case law out of that exact question, that we're not going to be the only jurisdiction that deals with it, and it'll be litigated and determined by the courts.
In particular, because the state has been trying to take actions to make more dense housing projects easier to build, which includes creating different exemptions for these projects under CEQA. So they're trying to find new laws and ways to make it so that if you're meeting the state's objectives of building affordable housing, that you don't have to go through that tier of CEQA at all. So like Jenna says, there's going to have to be some case law to flush that out, but our sense is that's going to be litigated.
And you think it's going to be litigated in that direction of not requiring the CEQA?
I think so.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Don't know necessarily, though, where the courts will go.
Sure.
Right.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
I have a follow-up. We're in the middle or the midst of this general plan update, and money's been allocated or grant money towards looking at project sites specifically for higher density, local, affordable projects. And I guess my question or encouragement would be kind of tied into the CEQA and environmental issues is if we're going to be looking at these specific sites or opportunity sites, that we're doing analysis that doesn't just kind of look at a baseline or what's allowable now, but if they were to come forward with a density bonus, how, could the site adequately contain those impacts, or what would the traffic look like, and what is the walkability, and kind of looking at things from a more realistic perspective instead of kind of the baseline, taking into account these new laws. So if we're not moving in that direction, I would encourage us to kind of use that umbrella or scope moving forward. That's all. Anyone else on this topic? Okay, yeah, we'll move forward. Okay.
Okay, next step is residential accessory uses and structures. Under the current code, we allow if someone owns two properties that are right next to each other and they have a house on one, they want to put an accessory structure on the other parcel. The current code allows them to do that. Normally, we don't allow a structure to be built on a vacant parcel, so this is almost a sort of a cleanup, but we wanted to include it as a discussion item in case you had more discussion you wanted to have about it. The idea was that if there's a deed restriction tying the two parcels together so you can't just sell the parcel that would then be non-conforming because it doesn't have an established residential use, if they wanted to construct a house on there, or merge the parcels or something, there would be ways to lift that deed restriction down the road depending on what they decide they want to do with those properties. So, any questions about that one?
Anyone on this side have any questions? No? Down here? Yeah, I don't have any questions.
So we have a couple of definition updates that we're recommending. The bars and drinking establishments is the first one. We've had a lot of interest in projects over the last few years where people have been interested in doing a tasting room or a tap room, things that we don't have in the code now. And we feel that those are appropriate as part of the drinking establishment definition. So we're recommending adding those in. And the difference between a bar and a restaurant is typically that the food is the primary use at a restaurant, but not at a bar. So we suggested adding some language just to clarify that if a business is operating as a restaurant and then it closes and is only serving alcohol after a certain time, then that at that point, it's not a restaurant anymore. And this next one kind of ties in, so I'll just go into that one and then you can ask questions if you have them. We've also had a number of projects that are either existing coffee shops or new coffee shops wanting to open in town, and we've had a little bit of a struggle trying to figure out where to fit them in our definitions because they're not really a fast food restaurant, but they're also not typically a table service restaurant. So we came up with a definition that would be kind of somewhere in between, and a lot of them are wanting to do alcohol sales, and what we're finding with that is that often a coffee shop will close at 6, and if they're going to be open until 11 and only serving beer and wine, then we think that at that point they should have a permit to be operating as a bar as opposed to a restaurant. So, questions on either of those?
How is primary use defined? Like take coffee bar downtown. Is that a coffee shop?
We defined, originally, I don't think they sold alcohol originally. So that fell under a fast food restaurant, I think is probably what we would have called it back then, since we didn't have a coffee shop definition.
Any other questions?
Just a quick clarifying, and this doesn't affect any existing businesses. This is just for businesses coming in to have a place to put them. And then do these classifications cost more money for the business owners?
No, this is just a new definition that we're adding to the code, so it's not changing the, it's just under the restaurant, sort of as a subcategory under the restaurant definitions. And I suppose the only way it would affect an existing business is if they applied for an alcohol license and they said, oh, we're going to be open, till 11, but not serving food after 6. Then we would say you need to go through the process to get a use permit to operate as a bar if that's the requirement in that zoning.
Anything else? We move on? I'm comfortable with what you presented.
Okay, so that would be updating chapter 18.220. We had a few cleanup amendments. This one I added a diagram because there were some questions about the street side setback. We have a table that talks about architectural features extending into setbacks, but it doesn't specify what's allowed in the street side. So I pulled this out of the code. The front yard setback, if you have a corner parcel, is the narrower side here. Typically that's 20 feet, and then you have your rears, typically 20, your side is 10, and then the side along the street here is 15. And it's bigger than your typical side yard setback just because it's on the street, so you have snow removal and traffic visibility issues that's why that gives a little bit of a bigger buffer on that side. So what we're proposing is to specify that whatever projections are allowed into the side yard setback would also be allowed on this side and the street side. And that would allow architectural features to encroach, but still keep them far enough away from the road that we don't think there would be any safety issues with snow removal and visibility.
Do you guys have any questions? Down here? This brings up a question for me about back to that 4-foot encroachment. So I wasn't thinking street side setback versus a regular side setback. So if you wanted to do an accessory dwelling unit and you had a corner lot or you were on a street, what does that look like? Can you go up to within 4 feet of the property line on that street side?
So the state requirements are for side and rear yard. They didn't include street side. So our interpretation would be that wouldn't be allowed. They did in the previous updates include specific language about structures within your front yard setback, converting those to an ADU, and had specific allowances for that. So we typically treat your front yard and your street side similarly in terms of garage encroachments. So I imagine we would apply that same standard if a existing structure was legally constructed in your street side and you wanted to convert it to an ADU.
But if you wanted to build an ADU and it faced the street side, it would follow the side yard setback rules?
If you were building it in the street side and it's a new structure, I imagine it would have to meet our current requirements about distance from the living area has to be a certain distance from the edge of pavement and windows and different openings so that you're not blowing snow into someone's living room.
Okay. I actually, not that I'm actively looking to do this, but I do have a corner lot and I'd love to build an ADU someday. And so I am curious, just from a practicality standpoint. So there are different conditions that apply for the street side versus a regular side yard.
The existing code has flexibility for garages in the front and street side setbacks. So potentially if someone got approved for a garage and built it there and then they wanted to come in and convert it and it had been legally constructed, then you could convert that. Whereas building a new ADU that close to the street may not be allowed.
You don't, so, but it would be allowed within the existing setback, 15 feet, or what did you, I don't remember what, I think you said 15 feet street side.
Yeah, so now we only allow garages to be in the front and street side setback up to a foot from your property line, as long as it doesn't have openings that are within 10 feet of the road or 20 feet, depending on how it's turned, and that's just for safety because of snow removal.
But an ADU, a single, or what is that called? I don't have the word. A single unit there on your property, a new construction, would follow the existing requirements.
Yeah, the existing requirements for living area.
Living area, which is 15 feet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting converting it because obviously, you might have windows and things that would be need windows. So that would have to be designed so that it's still meeting the safety requirements of being that close to the road.
Yeah.
That's how the current language is before this latest update.
Right. And is there a sense that might change with this push for more ADU development?
And that could be the next thing they come up with is you have to allow an ADU on 0 setbacks.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what the state's going to come up with next.
I mean, what's interesting is the state really is doing kind of a broad brush approach to this, and they're not thinking about things like snow removal,
Sure.
lack of parking,
Oh,
snow
yeah.
shed.
Right. No, these
So
are
we
urban
suspect that there could be some
answers.
public safety issues with what they're doing, and it is quite possible that there'll be the moving of the needle on some of these setback requirements due to some other public safety issues that we've got locally.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the update. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, thoughts on this before we move ahead? Okay.
All right, so the next is the Donner Lake setback. We've had a few occasions where people have wanted to put a above ground hot tub in their setback area, and our definition currently says you can't have swimming pools and other structures. And so we've struggled a little bit on, how to apply that standard. Our interpretation is that it would be similar to one of the other structures that's not allowed in the setback, with the idea being that you're trying to minimize any kind of structures that would interfere with views of the lake. So our recommendation would be just to clarify that in addition to swimming pools, hot tubs are also not allowed in that setback from the lake.
If a hot tub was on a deck, can they still do the 3-foot encroachment on the setback?
So you are allowed projections into the rear yard setback. I don't know off the top of my head if the Donner Lake setback allows our typical 6-foot deck encroachment. It may not, because there's different standards when you're on Donner Lake. Typically, the Donner Lake standards trump all the other standards. But people often do have them on decks, so it may just have to meet that setback from the high water mark of the lake.
Anyone have any questions or thoughts on this? Nope. I don't have any.
All right, last item, the grading and vegetation removal. This is another one that came up recently with one of my projects, actually, where they did tree removal because they had a permit from the state saying, some of these trees need to come down for fire safety. And what we realized is there was a lack of clarity in the code about communicating with us about what they were doing, and it caused a lot of issues where we thought they had no approvals to be doing what they were doing. So we wanted to just make it clear that, yes, you are allowed to do this tree removal and, remove hazardous trees if a forester says that's necessary. We just want to take a look at that documentation and make sure it does meet the other agency and the town requirements before people go removing trees. Any questions about that one?
Any questions?
I had a question on that one. So typically timber harvest plans are associated with like larger scale timber operations. I would think that it would be, like an exemption. There's different exemptions for tree removal. I think going straight to the timber harvest plan I just don't think that's really feasible. I don't think people prepare timber harvest plans to take down a few trees.
Right. The project I was working on, they were taking down a lot of trees. It was a commercial project that was heavily forested. And so the state did require them to get a timber harvesting plan for that, even though they weren't planning to sell the timber. So are you thinking that the language should maybe not specifically refer to that, but maybe to other types of state requirements?
I do. Because I get that, sure, it's like timber harvest plan and or a CAL FIRE exemption, or I just think that's not totally applicable to all projects. And it would be a little
Yeah, that's a good point.
More like just tree removal or tree removal plan or.
The other thing is requiring a forester. Like, what level of tree removal are we talking about here? There aren't many foresters in town. I think it's difficult to get a forester to come out and review the trees that you plan to remove. I guess I'm just a little unclear on how this applies to all projects, not just bigger projects that are taking out a lot of timber.
So when we have a vacant parcel or a commercial parcel and they want to remove a tree, say that they think is hazardous, we typically have them talk to some kind of professional. I think our language says either a forester or another registered professional or something. So maybe this could be a little more not vague, but flexible in terms of what type of professional it could be.
It seems like it should be to me.
And this is vegetation removal that's not necessarily part of an approved land use permit. These are some areas of our code that allow you to still take out trees that aren't tied to a development permit or a zoning clearance. I don't know if that helps clarify.
That does. So you're saying if someone just has a lot, they want to, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is we want to promote defensible space and, looking forward in terms of forest health. And this could be very onerous on folks to go through this process, and they might not end up taking care of their forest.
So there's 3 different subcategories. One is the timber harvesting plan approved by California Department of Forestry and Fire Safety. One is part of a homeowners association or other organization working with a public agency to maintain the health of the forest and enhance fire safety. That one requires some kind of documentation from a registered forester or other similar licensed professional. And then the third one was removal of vegetation to comply with fuel clearance regulations of Truckee Fire Protection District. And again, that gives options for either a forester or a licensed professional. I suppose if you think that should be expanded to include some additional language, we could definitely add something in.
I really do. I think timber harvest plan is that's a CEQA document that takes sometimes over a year to get approved.
So would you recommend a copy of the timber harvest plan, or I guess it would be timber removal done in accordance with the timber harvest plan or other state
or appropriate.
Or
usually
other
that
agency?
goes through CAL FIRE.
Yeah.
That's kind of our state agency for tree removal permits. But, I know in the basin there's TRPA. And so, not that that's in our jurisdiction. I'm just trying to figure out what would be the right language. And Truckee Fire, has their own jurisdiction. So I'm not quite sure what the language should be.
Okay.
But I do think it should be expanded upon.
So we could say timber harvesting plan or other states, or, well, I guess the timber harvesting, that one seems really specific to just timber harvesting. The one about Truckee Fire Protection, that could defer to some kind of recommendation from Truckee Fire, maybe like in just a written.
But
each
isn't that first one under A, if you go back a page, under A number 1, isn't that the exemption for tree removal on existing developed single-family residential subdivision lots?
Right. If you have a developed property, these would be applicable if you have a vacant parcel or a commercial parcel, is what these other allowances would be for.
Okay, but Jerusha, are you talking about developed properties or vacant ones?
Well, I'm talking vacant because that's what this is applying to.
Okay.
Right.
The last 3 are, yes. Each numbers 2, 3, and 4 are tied to oversight either by, an HOA's registered professional forester or 2 other governments, one being the state of California and the second being Truckee Fire. So are you proposing to add sort of a number 5 or to modify timber removal done under option 2 with CAL FIRE oversight?
Okay, let me just look at this for a second.
Okay.
It actually looks like the options are there now that I look at it a little bit more closely. I think it'll be okay.
Okay.
Great. I'm glad we're discussing it. I had a question. Was there a time when someone who was building was able to grade before they received their land use permits? Like a building permit?
They would need their grading permit. So the way our code's written says that we're not supposed to approve the grading permit before we approve the building permit,
Yeah.
but we do allow early grading permits in certain situations.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I was unclear.
This would be grading that's done before they have the grading permit. Just going
Okay.
out and doing the work without anything.
I appreciate the clarification. I wasn't clear on that. Okay. Anyone else? Any questions or thoughts, comments? No? Great.
Okay, so for those would be the sections we'd be cleaning up. So our recommendation would be to adopt Resolution 2019-27, recommending approval of these development code amendments with that additional language that I referred to earlier, and finding the amendments to be exempt from CEQA. So I'm happy to say that we are almost at the end of our list. We do have kind of a big topic that we're still working on. That's the telecommunications facilities. There's been a lot of changes in state and federal law related to telecom. So we're actually working with BBK on creating a model ordinance for us to use. We'll probably not just be updating the existing section, but potentially looking at creating a whole new section in the code because it's very complicated. So we're working with them on that and hope to have that to you probably in a few months. And then we'll be done until the state changes something else.
Well, that's exciting. So we'll open things up. I don't know if anyone wants to discuss anything before I ask for a motion.
As a formality, would you like to open and close public comment?
I wasn't sure if I should, but I guess, okay, I will open public comment. There's no one in the audience, and I don't think we accept calls. I don't know, do we get some public comment emails? Or it'd be kind of neat if we could have that interface. I know people do watch from home.
FaceTime.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, so I've opened public comment, and I'm seeing no public comment or interest, so I'm going to close public comment, and we'll move forward. Is there any interest in discussion or deliberation before I call for a motion or a motion?
I think I need to go back to that one, the tree removal one.
Sure. Yeah, that's what this
Number
is for.
2. So, tree removal done in accordance with the timber harvest plan or applicable CAL FIRE exemption. I mean, you can do work not under a timber harvest plan, not with the approval of a homeowners association, and not with the approval of the Truckee Fire Protection District. So I think we need to expand upon that a little bit. Just
Okay,
so there's...
So it would be changed to say timber removal done in accordance with a timber harvesting plan or applicable CAL FIRE exemption.
Yep.
Approved by the California Department of Forestry.
Perfect.
Anything else?
I mean, should there be any language in there about, the Truckee Fire Protection District weighing in on that?
There actually is on number 4, a little bit further down, or weighing in on the CAL FIRE permits.
Yeah, I mean, CAL FIRE and or.
Right. You should pull that up on your screen because number 4, it talks about having Truckee Fire Protection District approvals.
I can read it if that would help. Dave?
It's on
Yeah, I'm reading it.
Okay.
page 18.
I had to look at it too, so
I mean,
get it.
other similar licensed professional is pretty vague. It'd be nice to have a little bit more definition on what that is.
We could include arborist as another option.
I mean, to some degree, this was incorporated due to the dearth of, like Jerusha pointed out, registered professional foresters in our region. So I think what we're trying to do is give some latitude to someone who does have licensure that's credible, that can vouch for the need to remove an unhealthy or unsafe tree. I mean,
This still needs to be presented to and approved by the town, though, right?
yes, your recommendation will be forwarded to the town council and they'll be the final decision maker.
No, I mean, before someone does any tree harvesting or land clearing,
We would be
gotcha.
looking at it just to make sure it meets the local and then the other agencies' requirements.
so if an unqualified individual makes a recommendation, you could say that's not a qualified individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's discretion here given toward the folks at this table to make that determination of whether or not they meet the criteria.
I'm good.
Great. Would anyone like to make a motion? Or, Laura, would you bring up the screen with the, yeah, thank you. Anyone? Don't all jump
You're all
in
looking
at
me.
once.
I will make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2019-27, recommending the approval to the Town Council of the 2019 Development Code amendments and recommending the amendments to be exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15061B3.
Great.
And that includes that amendment, the other amendments that we made, correct?
There was the density bonus, adding that language, and then the tree removals, additional language.
Including those amendments.
I will second.
Excellent. And shall we do a roll call for this?
Sure, why
Director
not?
Nishimori?
Commissioner Tarnay,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Vice Chair Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Gove.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move to staff reports. But it says none, but I want to leave the door open in case something wanted to be reported, perhaps. Okay. We'll move forward with information items. Do any of the commissioners have any? Oh, actually, that's not us. That's you guys.
That's the next one.
Yeah, I'm getting my information and commissioner meetings confused. And there's
So I'm happy to
wires
provide an update on upcoming commission meetings. So January is potentially a busy meeting for your commission. We possibly have 4 different items, 2 that are certain. We have a time extension for a tentative map request that'll be before you. That is certain. We also have a new cell tower for Verizon Wireless that's located off of Highway 89 South, right before you would head into the mouse hole. And then we have 2 possible projects. One is a project in our downtown on West River Street. That's a subdivision and historic resource demolition and rehab. A little bit complicated on that one. And then we also have a potential new carport for Fast Lane gas station located off of Highway 267. So those last 2 are possible. We're not sure yet, but we should know pretty quickly. But at a minimum, we'll have 2 projects for you that evening.
Great. Okay, let's move on to item number 10. Do any of our commissioners have any reports? Let's start down here. Any?
I went to the holiday party.
No, that's
we had to
great.
leave early.
Oh. Duty called. Damn.
No reports.
Great. Okay. Jerusha. Okay. Susie, I know you have at least
Sorry, I
one
always
thing to
do.
report.
I got to sit next to Dave and his lovely wife at the holiday party, which was charming. It was lovely. Really enjoyed it. So since last month, I've been to the GPAC Climate Subcommittee meeting, November 20th, the regular whole GPAC meeting, November 21st. The downtown tree decorating on November 22nd was lovely and full of children and candy and sugar. Then I actually got to go talk to the Green Team on November 25th about the theory of providing more parking, increasing and creating an induced demand and more traffic. So I got to do that with Ann Floor and go talk to the Green Team. So that's Barbara Green, Sarah Green, and other members of that group. And hockey season has started, so hopefully I'll see everyone on the rink.
Great, thank you. I've had I don't have any meetings to report, but I had a member of the public contact me, and I wanted to put this out for staff. I had a question of kind of what avenues one might take to deal with this issue. So some friends of mine were walking on the Legacy Trail recently down by the Truckee River, and they heard gunshots, and they called the police, and they found out that because Fish and Wildlife own land or govern land that borders the Truckee River, kind of right where that bend is by the bridge, and then there's another location further down, actually at West River Street, that because those areas are overseen by Fish and Wildlife, that hunting is allowed. And so they were shocked, as was I, that you could hunt in such close proximity to where people are recreating. And I'm wondering if you guys know anything about that, and is this something you would just take up at the state level, or what avenues one might go down to address this incompatibility of uses?
I know several years ago, the police department made some changes to, shooting within the incorporated town boundaries. We need to look that up. It's in our Muni code. What I don't know is if it addresses state-owned property and if we have the ability to sort of usurp that requirement. It would probably mean some research on our part, or our town attorney's office, or whoever the correct, and probably the police department, to determine if we have any ability to sort of trump what CDFW is allowing. So short answer is I'm not certain, but we can certainly look into it.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, their thought was that whoever was doing this was not aware, hopefully not aware of what's happening, across the river. And maybe it's an education component or something. But, okay, well, more work to be done on that front. Anything else?
I have one random question about
Love random.
the parking study. I hear there is a parking study draft out. Is that something that we can access as of yet?
There is an administrative draft that's been produced, so it's not in a public draft form yet, but I would anticipate seeing that shortly in the new year once they've provided final feedback to the consultant. So it's close. And once that is available, then yes, we can make it, provide a link and give it to everyone. The same goes for the economic analysis for the general plan, that we have an administrative draft for that too. So that was the sort of market study that we asked Bay Area Economics to do. That will also probably be sometime in later January available for public.
Great. Anything else? Okay, with that, I'm going to adjourn until our next Planning Commission meeting on Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. I will be 46.